Hello, I'm Nathan Hamiel, Senior Director of Research for Kudelski Security. I'm also a member of the Black Hat Review Board and the AI Machine Learning and Data Science Track Lead. So first of all, when you think of AI coding tools, you think of coding assistants where developers get recommendations for code, it happens in their IDE, things like that. But really what's happening is development has kind of moved beyond that. So you have things like code review tools that operate outside the IDE. They interact with things like GitHub and GitLab. They're doing things like reviewing pull requests and making code changes and writing documentation, all the fun stuff that developers often don't like to do. So they're assisting in that front. However, they're powered by the same generative AI tools that are used across the board, and that means they're open to attacks. And when people implement these things, quite often they're outsourcing functional components of their applications to LLMs. It means they're like black boxes. And what ends up happening is they're making requests for calls for code. That code is being returned and executed inside the application. So an attacker can get data into the flow and conduct things like remote code execution attacks against these tools. RCE is a service. That's just how some of them work. And one of the interesting paradigms I think that we're kind of shifting to that's different and new is that using tools in this way, using functional components going to LLMs and having them generate code, means that developers may not know what code is going to execute at runtime. And it could be different every single time the application runs. I think we're not quite used to that from a reliability perspective, but definitely from a security perspective. So it's something that security professionals are going to have to start dealing with more and more as they're doing evaluations of these tools, helping developers navigate the risks and doing validation activities against these tools before they deploy them in production. I think it's important to separate the use cases out and understand the risk of each use case. So everything with AI is use case specific. So for example, deploying AI to answer questions over frequently asked questions, relatively low risk profile. Having an AI coding assistant write vulnerable code into a critical application, obviously much higher risk use case. So I think it's okay to have developers using these tools in lower risk use cases and spending a lot more time on the higher risk use cases. So I came up with something a couple years ago called refrain, restrict, and trap. It's a good way of just thinking about refraining from using tools in these high risk use cases. Things are gonna be different for every organization because risk profiles are different. So you refrain up front. Once you decide that the use case is appropriate, then you restrict these tools as much as possible. Many of them are over permissioned. So restricting that down, not allowing it to access certain tools or data, and then finally trapping the inputs and outputs, so maybe putting some guardrails around it and filtering out potentially sensitive data on the outputs, filtering out some attacks on the inputs. Now, none of this is a silver bullet. You have to be mindful that things change very fast, but I'm a very big fan of simplicity. I've said the most AI security is just application and product security. Doing simple things quickly is much better than trying to do something super complicated and taking a long time to do it. So I think starting by doing an inventory, understanding what tools are being used, and then applying these controls later on is the best approach. Nils, Amiet, my co-presenter, found a very devastating vulnerability in a tool called CodeRabbit. It's one of these AI code review tools. CodeRabbit is the most downloaded, most popular AI-assisted tool in the GitHub marketplace. And I think that attack demonstrates how, as someone who's looking for vulnerabilities, you have to understand the entire context involved because you'd miss it. Like if you don't understand the systems that are being interacted with, if you don't understand the tools being used and you don't understand how to manipulate the system, you're going to miss these types of vulnerabilities. But CodeRabbit was just one of the tools that we found vulnerabilities in, and we were able to exploit that through a tool called Rubocop for Ruby. And once we got access to the container, we had remote code execution, and to our surprise, all of their secrets were inside of this container, including private keys, which means that once you get the GitHub private key from their application, you could then perform write activities to any of the repositories that they were doing code reviews on. So game over, basically. We also demonstrated issues in other tools and had very similar results. So for another one, we were able to exploit the tool and get the AWS admin key. So it's pretty obvious that we could have basically done anything we want. We could have had any of that stuff happen to their customers. So it's easy to beat them up, and we're at Black Hat, it's easy to have a laugh about this. But I think they're trying to move so fast, and one of our big things that we found was a lack of security knowledge, like across the board. And if you don't have someone on staff that understands security, that understands all of the components involved, right, you're going to make these types of mistakes. So why have all of your secrets inside a container, exposing them to a vulnerable subprocess? That's just something you shouldn't do. And it's known as security basics, but it's something that isn't happening. It's something that's not being taken into account when these systems are deployed.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you for having me.